Welcome to Rewatch-and-Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Hannibal Season 2, Episode 7, Yakimono. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary of what happened within the episode. So the episode starts with Miriam being processed after she's been removed from the well or cistern that she was trapped in. And Jack, while this is happening, is sitting in his office, replaying the message that he had recorded of her that was sent to him over and over and over. And then we see Jack interviewing Miriam, where he's trying to apologize and take responsibility for sending her after the Ripper, but she's saying that she doesn't blame him, that she feels that it was her fault, that she was too cocky, too reckless with her life, etc., etc. And he tries to get information on the Ripper from her, but she reveals that her memories had been altered and messed with, and she wasn't able to remember what the Ripper looked like because he always stood in front of light, and she remembers a lot of light, but she does feel that she could identify him via voice. We then have Alana bringing Hannibal into the interrogation room, and he realizes pretty quickly that Miriam is listening and that for whatever reason she can't identify the Ripper's looks but the voice, and that is why Alana is there, so that he will have somebody to talk to so that she can hear his voice. And Miriam does end up clearing Hannibal as his voice isn't matching what her altered memories remember. We then move on to Will getting released from the prison, or not the prison, but the criminally insane institution that he's in. And he and Chilton talk about how the Ripper had set him free, and basically Chilton talks about how like they'll need to get Hannibal because he's starting to make moves, and Will basically, warns him that Chilton's probably next to die and that he'd better take care, etc., etc. Will then walks out of the prison, and as he's leaving, or the facility, and as he's leaving, Jack arrives to pick him up, and he tells him about Miriam being found, and Will is then brought to the cabin where Jack walks him through some of the evidence they found. For example, Beverly's blood was there that was drained before she was sliced into the slides. They found the place based on which had been condemned, which had been based on the water found in the lungs of the last victim, which was the tree man. And then also walks him to the cistern that Miriam was found in. Will lets the pendulum swing and goes over the design before letting Jack know that the evidence will lead away from the Chesapeake Ripper, or rather, like Hannibal. Well, basically, he still thinks it's Hannibal, so he's basically saying like whatever he finds there will lead him away from Hannibal and toward whoever they want to pin the murders on, as obviously that's no longer Will, so there'll be another person, and he warns Jack to, take any evidence he finds with a grain of salt. Will then goes home to meet his dogs for the first time and return to his house, which obviously has been empty for some time, and his dogs were taken care of by Alana. So he and Alana have a conversation about Hannibal. She reveals that she's not overly fond of Will anymore because of his attempt to kill Hannibal and how that proved that he was not who she thought he was. And essentially also, without saying the words, reveals to Will that she is with Hannibal, and Will warns her that he is dangerous. We then have Chilton meeting up with Jack to offer help, as he had helped previously on the cases, and he had helped Will recover memories due to the psychic driving, so he feels that he might be able to help Miriam to also regain memories, but Jack does decline his help. We then have Will meeting Miriam, who is being fitted for a prosthetic, and they talk about their experience with the Ripper and their mutual experience of the light therapy causing seizures, causing lost time and blackouts. We then move forward to Hannibal walking into his kitchen, and he smells Will's aftershave and realizes Will is there. He turns around, Will is holding a gun towards him, and he said that he wants to pick up where they had left off before Jack intruded, and as Will recalls it, they were in a kitchen and Hannibal was asking how Will would feel if he could kill him. And then Hannibal picks up where they left off and asks Will how it would feel to kill him. But then he kind of says, if I'm not the Ripper, you've killed an innocent man. If I am the Ripper and you kill me, there'll be nobody to answer your questions, and don't you want to know how it's going to end? And Will then holds the gun for a little bit longer, but then he relaxes and just leaves. We then flash back to Miriam originally finding Hannibal, and then we see that Jack has brought her back to Hannibal's office and wants to attempt to recover her memories. The scene also sort of parallels the flashback of how Hannibal was discovered originally, with Miriam coming into the office, going to the table where his sketches are, looking at the sketches, Hannibal coming up behind her, only this time there's no incriminating sketches. Jack is present, and Miriam has been psychically altered, psychologically altered to not remember the incident, and so does not have any sort of reaction to being in his office. And then they do make the attempt to recover the memories, but Jack playing the message to her and her repeating the words when she's trying to recover the memories, but ultimately doesn't seem to add much to the story. Then the lab finds Hannibal's fingerprint on one of the petals of the tree guy, not enough for a courtroom, but enough to get a match in their system. And Jack remembers that Will said that the evidence would lead away from the real Ripper and towards a patsy. So Jack then takes this advice to mean that it's trying to frame Hannibal, therefore leading away from the Ripper, and he realizes that Chilton also fits the bill and decides that Chilton may be a suspect, which we then see Chilton getting home. And as he enters his home, he hears a beeping. He goes downstairs to look into what exactly is happening, and he finds Abel flatlining in a room. And then as he looks around the room, he sees the limbs on some trays and some being cut up, like it's in the middle of being cut up. And of course, he runs upstairs in fear, trips over some packed bags, only to find Hannibal in his plastic suit, who then knocks him out and tells him that when he wakes up, his only choice will be to run. Chilton then wakes up with a knife in one hand and a gun in the other. He drops the knife that's in the one hand, and he follows the trail of blood to his kitchen where he finds the dead FBI agents, one disemboweled, one mimicking the wounded man. Murder, which was the one that Miriam was chasing at the time of her abduction. And so he decides he does have to run, and he runs to Will's house because he knows Will also knows that Hannibal's actually the killer, not Chilton, and he wants to use his shower. Meanwhile, the FBI finds Chilton's house and all of the evidence, the dead FBI agents, etc. that's there. Meanwhile, after a shower, Chilton is complaining to Will that he was never a potential victim, but actually setting up as a patsy because his profile matches Hannibal's, which also matches the Ripper's, and so he's the perfect, scapegoat at this point. And then the dogs start barking, and Chilton realizes he's been found out. Jack arrives. Will tries to talk to him, say, things are not what you think, but he'll go get Chilton and bring him out. And Jack doesn't listen. First, pushes past him into the house. Chilton has escaped out the back, is running through the woods. Jack chases him, shoots at him, and after some near misses, Chilton puts his hands up, gives up. And then we see Chilton being processed at the lab before being put into an interrogation room with Alana. They then talk, and Miriam, who is listening from the other room, identifies Chilton's voice as the Chesapeake Ripper, and she starts to freak out. Jack hugs her to comfort her, and then she basically takes advantage of that to grab Jack's gun and shoot him in the face through the cheek. Will then shows up at Hannibal's office, and he asks to come in, and Hannibal invites him in. They talk about, well, Will notes that, asks if he's expecting anybody. Hannibal says only him, only Will, and then Will comments that he's left his standing appointment open for him. And they then discuss how Miriam took her life back by feeling compelled to shoot Chilton. And then Hannibal asks him how he will take his life back. And Will tells him that he would like to resume his therapy. And then we see them sitting in their seats across from each other. And that is how we end the episode. So now that we have gone over what happened in the episode, it's now time to rank the episode. As always, we'll be ranking on two lists. The mostly objective ranking list, which is using set values and no emotion to score the episode, and then the personal ranking list, which uses my opinion to determine a score for the episode. So for our mostly objective rank values, I highlighted those that I felt applied to the episode. Some of these apply multiple times within the episode as well, so to start off with, we'll go with our multi-episode supporting character developments. Obviously, we have Miriam, who has started to reintegrate into society and attempt her recovery. She's fitted for a prosthetic arm, which is robotic as the hand is able to move as she puts it on. We also have her shooting Chilton at the end of the episode, and so her developments are worth 2 points. We then have Chilton, who obviously has the development of being framed rather spectacularly by Hannibal, with planting evidence that'll point towards Hannibal, which then automatically makes them move away on Will's advice and point toward Chilton, who has a similar, rap sheet or profile. We then have obviously Abel being placed into his house, the FBI agents being killed there by Hannibal, who's in his plastic suit, so not leaving any evidence. And then, of course, his attempt to run, which fails, and then in the interrogation, he ends up being shot in the face. So, a lot of development for Chilton, which is also worth 2 points. Then finally, our last multi-episode supporting character development belongs to Abel, who we learn had been kept alive by Hannibal all this time since the so I know it's really dark, but I just find, maybe because it's so out there and beyond what anybody would ever think would be acceptable behavior in reality, and because it's fiction, but the fact that he was fed his own thigh is just endlessly impactful. And anyways, from that moment, he has actually been kept alive. We see his body is missing multiple limbs at this point, and as Chilton arrives, we hear it go from beeping to a flatline sound, which indicates that he died as Chilton arrived. So he had been alive that entire time and now has passed on after being Hannibal's prisoner, and that also is worth another 2 points, bringing us to 6 so far. We then have a resolved subplot, which of course is the fact that Will's prison arc is done, or facility arc is done. He's now out, back a free man, and that chapter, at least with Will behind bars, has now closed, and that is also worth 2 points, bringing us up to 8. We then have our multi-season main character developments, and of course, with Will, that is him being released from the facility. We also have him at the end of the episode resuming his therapy with Hannibal. Both of these things, pretty big of developments, and that's worth 4 points. And then a final positive 4 points for the development with Hannibal, which of course is that he's treated as a suspect and cleared by Miriam, that he is threatened by Will in his own kitchen, and then that Will is resuming therapy with him. And that is also worth 4 points, bringing us up to a positive 16 points for the episode. However, that does not mean that there is not negatives to the episode. And while they all fall into the same category, there are a few. So, first, the category that they all fall under is the negative messaging or behavior. First off, we have threatening somebody with a firearm. This is not a good thing. In fact, it happens to be a crime. And so that is worth -2. We then have breaking and entering, which again is a crime. So negative messaging and behavior, that's another -2. We then have, and I can't remember if it's attempted or successful murder, but Miriam did end up shooting Chilton in the face. I believe it's attempted because I think I remember him coming back in the series, but honestly, I'm not 100% sure, and I'm not really going to go look it up. So it's either attempted or actual murder. Either way, both are a crime, so that is worth -2 points, which brings us to 10. But we do have one final negative messaging or behavior, and this, of course, is the framing of Chilton by Hannibal, and we know Hannibal framed him because we, A, know he was the one who kidnapped Abel, as we had that dinner scene, and 2, he obviously is there in his plastic suit, so he has been framed. And therefore, that is also worth another -2 points. Which brings us, for this episode, to a total of 8 points on our mostly objective ranking. So that brings our season 2 ranking so far on our mostly objective ranking to, in first place, Kaiseki, second, Mokuzuke, sorry, Futamono in third. This episode, Yakimono comes in fourth, then Hassan fifth, Sakazuke is sixth, and then in seventh, Takawase. So as for my personal opinion on the episode, I really liked this episode. I was very entertained by it. I I I read a lot of fan fiction, so forgive me for how that colors my opinion of the episode, but I very much enjoyed this episode. For example, when Chilton and Will is saying goodbye to Will at the prison or the facility, I don't think it's actually a prison, but it's a facility for the criminally insane. Anyways, when he's letting Will go, he they basically like Will warns him that Hannibal is smoke. He's not going to be caught easily. Once like he's not going to be caught easily, and Abel's already been taken, so Chilton will be next. And then Chilton, I don't know, feeling some type of way about it, like asks Will, like, aren't you worried? Like, why isn't he killing you? Aren't you going to be killed next? And Will goes, no, because he wants to be my friend. And I'm like, oh, that's so sweet. But it's so true that he wants to be his friend. It was a moment. It got to me. Then, and then of course we have the imagery of the episode that kind of goes through. So Will is taken to the cabin to look at evidence. He comments to Jack how, the Ripper's been caught before, and once you catch a fish and let it go, it'll be a lot harder to catch it again. And he does his like pendulum swing thing. And when he's going through his design or the design of the Ripper, he imagines the tree inside of Hannibal's office, like in front of like the big windows in the office, and he takes the heart with like seeds in it that are going to grow into the plant. I can't remember which one was found in the heart. It was the previous episode, but with like the buds that are going to grow into the flowers in the in like the end display, and he then puts that into its place in the body cavity and then we watch like the tree grow and all of the flowers blooming, and that's beautiful imagery. I also like how with the FBI agents that are killed in Chilton's house, they're killed kind of in like a bit of a taunting way. Obviously, Chilton was disemboweled by Gideon and had his like insides kind of played with by him. And then we have one of the FBI agents having a similar situation of like disembowelment with all of his organs kind of spilling from his cavity. And then we have the Wounded Man, which is a callback to Miriam, who had been investigating the Ripper at the time, and then the reason she caught Hannibal was because she found the wound man in a picture, like a sketch that Hannibal had drawn. But then that's also the murder that Chilton used to convince Abel that he was the Ripper. And now we have Abel dead downstairs and another recreation of the wound man, which honestly isn't the most aesthetically appealing of the murders that they have to keep recreating it, but it is significant to the show, so I understand why they did it. But I do like how, like, in each of these murders are thoughtfully created and both tied to Chilton in some way. And then finally, we get to the most fun part, which is the final scene between Hannibal and Will, and how Hannibal had been keeping his appointment open for Will. And we had seen this in several of the episodes while Will was behind bars. We saw Hannibal sitting across from an empty chair at the time that Will would normally be there, and they had shown this to us multiple times in multiple episodes. And then at the end of this episode, we come full circle because he's kept his appointment open. Will wants to resume his therapy, and then at the very last scene of the episode, Hannibal and Will are sitting across from each other again, resuming their therapy, and finally the seat across from Hannibal isn't empty anymore. Will is back in there, and that while they both agree that their previous friendship is over, clearly their relationship with each other, their complex therapist, patient, friend, not friend, friend and me sort of relationship is back open, and I just love that ending. So I naturally, having loved this episode so much, and especially like all of the interactions with the characters and all of the various developments and the fact that there were so many developments to keep us engaged and interested throughout the episode, I gave it a 10 out of 10. I really enjoyed this. And so that brings our personal ranking for season 2 so far to, in first place, this episode, Yakimono. Then Mukozuke in second, Hasan, Kaiseki, Futamono, Sakazuke, and then currently in last place is Takawase. And so finally we arrive at our final segment, which is our series ranking so far, where we're going to be ranking each of the seasons against each other. So far we've completed season 1, and on the mostly objective ranking, that ended with a score of 83.85%. Season 2 so far has a score of 55 out of 130. On our personal ranking side, we have season 1 completing with a score of 66.92%, though season 2 so far has earned 61 points out of a possible 130. And with that, we have now rewatched and ranked Hannibal season 2 episode 7, Yakimono. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.